right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Welcome to the last of 3 of our Career Fundamentals webinars that are taking place during the month of October. My name is Dina Andrews, and I'm with the Career Management team at Villanova. I focus on students who are in the College of Professional Studies, specifically those enrolled in our certificate programs. With me today is Kimmy Mariani. She's in our College of Professional Studies. And Kim is going to help me manage the chat and just be available for general support. So Kimmy, thanks for being here. I am a little under the weather, folks, so I will do my best to get through this without coughing or having to blow my nose. So bear with me as I get through the next hopefully about a half hour. So a little bit about me. I have a 20-year background in human resources where I spent time in talent management, executive coaching, mergers and acquisitions, and executive recruiting. So I'm really excited to share some of my background with all of you today. Just some housekeeping items. Please remember to keep yourselves on mute. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat function to ask them, and then we will go through them all during the Q&A session at the end. So our goal today is to help give you a few tools to be prepared to negotiate an offer of employment and be ready to handle salary questions in a way that helps you kind of get what you want out of the offer negotiation process. All right, so let's dive in. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with some foundations, so corporate compensation models. Basically, how do companies and organizations structure their pay scales? We'll talk a little bit about salary calculators and how you can do your research. We're going to go over laws related to wage transparency and salary history. And then we're going to dive into the salary discussion and the negotiation and some tips that are helpful. Hopefully that will be helpful for you. All right, so let's start with a brief overview of corporate compensation management practices. Corporate compensation is typically the process of planning, analyzing, and distributing an organization's employees' compensation. So it usually involves establishing salary ranges, negotiating raises, and ensuring pay is competitive in the market. There are a number of topics that fall under this. So number one is benefits. So when we talk about compensation, that includes non-monetary benefits as well. So that means health benefits. It could mean it could be a bonus. It could be paid time off. It could be stock options. We typically find that many of those things are negotiable when you are at the offer of employment. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. Corporate compensation management also involves analyzing data, so making sure that they understand both external as well as internal data. And that internal data is things like, how do we pay our employees based upon demographics, based upon performance, based upon job responsibilities? It starts with the job responsibilities. So most corporate entities will do a job description analysis. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, but they will start with using external salary surveys to ensure that they understand what the market is commanding for those positions. They'll also do internal job equity analysis. So during my time in HR, we frequently did internal job equity analysis to make sure if we had, I'm going to make an example here. If we had 20 people all in a business analyst role, and we looked at their demographics and we looked at their performance, were we paying people fairly? Were we paying people according to how they were performing? And were we paying them according to what the market was commanding at the time? And then finally, most large companies are going to have to manage compliance. So there will be local, state, federal laws and regulations that will command how they pay their employees and making sure that they are being fair. Again, specifically based on demographics, and are they being equitable in how they spread their compensation? So compensation management is a key part of talent management and employee retention. It helps companies attract and retain talent, reward their top performers, improve employee satisfaction, reduce turnover. There's a whole host of reasons. And typically the HR department or some companies will have specific compensation teams that are responsible for managing these strategies. So, how does this work? Companies typically purchase third-party validated salary data that is often specific to their industry and to the positions that they employ, so the positions they have within their company. So, this data will include a job summary as well as the credentials that are required for that position. So that might mean how many years of experience. And so in this chart here, you'll see kind of a very basic example of the leveling that you'll see. So maybe director level 1, director level 2. In some, you may see an example like business analyst 1 all the way through business analyst level 5. And each of those positions is going to have a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. Companies typically strive to pay at that midpoint range, but they have a range and as a lever that they can pull depending upon the candidate's experience, depending upon, maybe they are slightly overqualified for the position, but they're going to be fast tracked to another role. All of those kind of levers are available to pull using these ranges. So recruiters and HR professionals might use a chart similar to what you see here that will give them this range, including a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum salary range. Okay. So in my previous world of HR, we would call this pricing a job. And that meant every role in the company had an associated price or a salary range, as I mentioned, which would then be used by the recruiters and the managers to determine how they would pay employees in this role. The range also allows for negotiation when you make an offer to a candidate. So just know, typically, we're going to talk a lot about ranges today, but typically recruiters are expecting a counter offer. And this range is what gives them flexibility to move up and down, depending upon, like I said, skills, years of experience, performance data. You may also find that there are hot positions or hot skills in the market that many companies will pay towards the top range to incentivize those candidates. So it typically ebbs and flows based upon what's going on, in the market. There was a period of time where business intelligence or data analysts were very hot and really hard to find. And so in my previous company, we would pay those employees a little bit higher in the range because they were a really difficult to find position and they just commanded a higher salary. Some positions also include a bonus program that could be paid out quarterly or annually. Again, it all depends upon how the company wants to structure their compensation ranges. And then you'll also find that ranges will include geographic differentials. So that means an employee or a paralegal in New York City is probably going to make 20, 30, maybe even 40% more than a paralegal located in North Carolina. And that is based upon cost of living differentials. So hopefully this help explains the basis for compensation models and salary ranges. Okay. Throughout our time today, you're going to hear me suggest that you do your research and be prepared for the discussion about compensation. There are many ways to do that. And here are a few generally available salary survey tools that really would help you understand the industry and the market data to support compensation. So Robert Half is a really well-known talent management company. They have a recruiting function, and so they'll collect compensation data for positions that they hire for. On their site, you'll find a salary calculator that is based on geographic locations, and they have over 450 positions in their database. Salary.com is also a salary calculator, but will also give you what's called a salary report for various positions, and that's based on level, based on years of experience, also based on geographic data. So another really good tool that's helpful. And then finally, Glassdoor is an interactive site that allows employees to self-report data. So if you were on any of our previous webinars this month, you probably heard me talk about Glassdoor as a good way to do company research. Specifically at the beginning of your job search, because Glassdoor also offers company reviews, there's information about culture, and it's also a source for job postings. So that's really where their salary information comes from. So when I say do your research, this is really one of the ways, and really a primary way, that you will be able to learn a little bit more about what's in the market. Okay. So before we go much further, I did want to make sure that you're all aware of what we call or what are called wage transparency laws. So what is wage or pay transparency? Pay transparency supports the principle that employees should be paid equally for performing the same or similar work, regardless of gender, race, or other demographic factors that have led to wage discrimination. So these are laws that are designed to ensure that all employees and or candidates have equal access to advancement opportunities, and it prevents past pay disparities from affecting future earnings. So really what does this mean is that there are various laws throughout the country that require employers to post a range in their job postings, or are required to post a salary range that is accessible somewhere to their employees who are in those positions. So this allows employees and job applicants to have a better sense of what they can expect when they are either negotiating salaries, in terms of what the salary range is before you even apply for the job, and really help you make more informed career decisions. So these laws vary based upon state, based upon geographic localities. Some of them are dependent upon the number of employees in a company. So you'll see in some states, if you have 4 or more employees, you have to disclose this information. For others, it requires 100 or more employees. So it just depends upon the state and what their law specifically entails. So I would say just check as you're applying for positions, just check, validate the salary transparency law. So currently, these are the states that have laws. And then there are a handful that are still pending. Like I said, New Jersey does not have a state law, but Jersey City does. So you just want to check with the different jurisdictions to see who has any type of state transparent or salary transparency law. There are also salary history bans in place in certain states that prohibits an employer from asking wage history from job applicants. So what does this mean? This means that when you apply for a position, a recruiter or whomever you speak with in that interview process cannot ask you what you have previously made in your in your earlier positions. They can ask you what you currently make, but they can't ask you historically what you've made. And sometimes that is used by recruiters to say, okay, well, Jane Doe was previously making $50,000. Now she's making $75,000, but maybe we can offer her less because, she's already been making, less money than that. So again, some states have a ban on asking your previous wage history. Again, very similar to the salary transparency. So it depends upon, states, sometimes cities. And I would just make sure that you are doing your research. There is no federal law right now, but there are 22 states and 22 local jurisdictions that have enacted these laws. So again, this is just kind of part of doing your research when you are preparing for an offer negotiation. Okay, so let's dive into the art of salary negotiation. So as you think about your plan for negotiating, as I said, you have an advantage if you are prepared and you have a strategy for maximizing your outcome. So you're going to hear me again say research, research, research. This could mean any number of things. So all the things that we've talked about, understand which states have laws banning the questions that you can be asked about your salary history. Go out, jump on those salary calculators, and just get a general idea of what the market is commanding. But really the other thing that you should be thinking about is what types of questions can you be asking during the interviews to ensure that your background is aligned with the expectations for the position. So in previous sessions, you've heard me talk about how do you use the job description to make sure you align your background and your education to the requirements of the position. That job description helps you write your cover letter. It helps you tailor your resume. And now at this part of the process, it really should help you ensure that your background is aligned with their expectations for the position. So know where you exceed their expectations. Maybe perhaps there are job responsibilities that are a stretch for you. All of these things can factor into that eventual package that you receive. So make sure that you are asking the right types of questions in that job interview process to understand, am I a good candidate for this role? Am I exceeding what they're looking for this role? And if so, maybe that gives you a little leverage to ask for, a higher base salary. The next thing to consider is, are you prepared to communicate those expectations? So, again, at this point in negotiating, are you clear on how your skills and background compare to the critical elements of the job description? Really, this means, are you clear on your value, and are you able to fill the skill gap that the employer needs? So do you have what they are looking for, and do you exceed? And what does that mean for how you negotiate? So really what you want to think about is what's negotiable. The short answer is, in most cases, almost anything is negotiable. So in addition to salary, as I mentioned earlier, you'll have levers that you can pull with other benefits, such as maybe stock options or start dates or moving expenses or the ability to work from home. All of these levers can be pulled to help you create the package that you ultimately will seal the deal for you. Okay, so when do you discuss salary? So in the interview process, you're going to find that you're discussing salary probably a handful of times. A lot of people are surprised to know that the negotiation really begins before you even get an offer. It actually begins whenever the topic of compensation is first raised. So that could be a simple question at the beginning of the process, where the recruiter says, what are your salary expectations, or what is your current salary? It might even be in the first interview when you're asked about your expectations. Many recruiters will do this in one of the first few conversations, and that's because they like to ensure that you're both aligned. Really, ideally, make sure you're in the same ballpark. So imagine that you are invited to participate in multiple interviews, and maybe you've taken time off from work, or you've had to rearrange your personal schedule to accommodate the hiring manager. And then you get to the end of the process and you realize you've got a huge discrepancy between you and what the company between what you're expecting to be paid and what the company is expecting to pay you. So no one wants to waste time. Frankly, there could be other candidates, or that the recruiters could be talking to. There could be other positions that you may have missed out on while you were, courting each other. If the recruiter does not bring it up earlier in the process, I always suggest that you ask about a salary range before you invest a significant amount of time and preparation into this company. So it's helpful to try and get them to disclose a range up front. And then if they ask you, what are you looking for? Your initial answer can be, I expect to be paid, a fair market pay based on the required credentials. It's okay to give a range. I would give a broad range because you may learn things about the company or about the position as you get through this process that changes your mind about what your salary expectations are. So it might come up after you've completed one or two interviews. Now you've spoken with the hiring managers, you understand the role, you understand the responsibilities. Maybe they validate your salary requirements to ensure that you're still aligned. Perhaps there are more expectations in the position that are stated than what are stated in the job description. You may decide that, the job description is asking for 1 to 2 years, but as you've talked to the hiring manager, they're really looking for a much higher level of skill set than originally anticipated. That may, cause you to pause and say, maybe this commands a higher salary. So it's never a bad idea to validate or check in if you learned something about the role during the interview process that maybe you didn't know at the beginning. And there are ways to frame that conversation. So you could say, what is the typical range, in this firm for others in similar positions? Or what is the budget for the role? Back to that corporate compensation management, you will certainly find that companies will have a budget in mind. So what are they willing to pay for this position? And usually going over that budget ends up with somebody getting their hand slapped. So typically there is a budget for the position. So just consider ways to politely say validate that the salary that you are expecting is still on par with their expectations as you learn more in the process. Okay. So you've gotten through the first few interviews. Maybe you find yourself now at the end of the process and you're speaking with the recruiter or the hiring manager and they want to close the deal. So how do you approach this? What is your strategy? So by now, hopefully you've done your research. You understand what the market is commanding for the role. And you've also compared your experience to the responsibilities of the job. And that results in what I would say is your personal market value. What do you believe is your value in the market? How do you approach this conversation? Usually the recruiter is going to lead with their starting offer and they will give you a dollar figure, right? Earlier, we talked about salary ranges. Again, typically a position is going to have a range. That high end of the range is usually reserved for candidates who maybe exceed expectations of the role. Maybe they're on an accelerated path to a manager position. The lower end of the range could be for someone who is newer to the industry or maybe newer in the job market, or perhaps someone who has a bigger learning curve before they're fully functioning in the position. Employers are expecting a counter offer from candidates. So it's very rare that they're going to extend their best and final offer upfront unless they explicitly state that when they make the offer. And that will happen. Recruiters or hiring managers will say, for this role, we are prepared to offer $80,000. That is our maximum. That is what we have budgeted for the role, and that is not negotiable. You may hear them say those words, it is not negotiable. At that point, you know that the number itself probably isn't going to move. But I always tell folks to consider what is your counter offer before you go into this discussion. So during my time in recruiting, I would often ask myself, is it worth losing a good candidate over $3,000 or $4,000? And oftentimes the answer was no. I would also tell candidates to make a list of your non-negotiables and your negotiables, right? So what are you willing to give up to potentially gain something else? A helpful tip here is to avoid what's called single issue negotiation. So when you come up with your list of things, your ideal package, right? What does that entail? Maybe it's working from home. Maybe you'd like a bonus. Maybe you would like a certain number of vacation, paid time off days. Maybe you'd like to work from home 3 days a week. I would also often suggest to people present your wish list at once as one package, as opposed to negotiating each item alone. The last thing you want to do is come to an agreement on salary. Now the recruiter thinks this is great, we've got them closed, and you come back and say, oh, by the way, you're offering me 15 vacation days, but I really want 20. You want to present it all at once so that you can complete one negotiation. Think about what is important to you. Sometimes I would tell people, if you come up with a list of 4 things, pick 3 that are negotiable, right? So maybe you are willing to accept a lower salary if you can get 5 additional paid time off days. For some people, work-life balance is a driving factor in their job satisfaction. So maybe they would be willing to accept maybe a lower bonus if the employer agrees to let them work from home 3 days a week. You have a much better chance at getting a great and final package by presenting your wish list upfront all at once and at the start of the negotiation, as opposed to a line item kind of list. When we think about package, right, you think about the word package, it really references the complete suite of offerings that a company is going to present to you. This may also include health benefits. And so I would also encourage you to think about or to ask questions around what am I going to be paying for my health benefits? So, what is the company's contribution to my health benefits? What is versus what is the employee contribution? And is that negotiable? So, if the recruiter comes back to you and says $80,000 is our best and final offer, one of the things you could counter with is, would you be willing to contribute more to my monthly health benefits, right? That could be another way of not necessarily getting more in your salary, but it does put more money in your pocket because it's less that you will be paying for your health benefits. So thinking about the collaborative approach, which is really that win-win approach. It assumes that the whole compensation package is negotiable. And the idea there is that there are more benefits and maybe kind of goodies that can be added to that package by discussing all options and all alternatives. So that's what you want to focus on in your negotiation when you use the collaborative approach. The other really critical part of this process is always making sure that you have your final offer in writing. And when I say final, I mean that is after you've completed all of your negotiating. So if you get a document that maybe doesn't include some additional PTO days that they threw in at the end of the negotiation, I would not sign anything. I would absolutely go back to the recruiter and say, in our last discussion, you agreed to increase my paid time off days to 20. Please, would you mind please updating that on the offer and sending it back to me? You want to make sure that all of the elements that you fully negotiated are included in the final document that you receive. It is a legal document, so you want to ensure that it captures all of your terms in case it needs to be referenced in the future. Okay. All right, so there are a few common negotiation mistakes that we do see. Some of this we've already referenced. Number one, I would say is like a lack of preparation. You've probably, if you've been on all of our sessions this month, you've heard me say how important preparing for every phase of the interview, the resume, the interview, and the offer stage is. It is critically important that you are educated, you understand what is expected of you, and you are prepared to go in asking for what you believe you are valued at. Okay. Another common negotiating mistakes is just accepting the first offer. A lot of times, people will say, "Oh, you get all prepared to negotiate, and then you get the offer, and maybe you get cold feet, right? Or you feel like you're asking the company, you feel like you're putting them out." Like I said, they are expecting a counter offer. Most positions have a range, and so it will not be a surprise to the recruiter if you go back and ask for something additional. Attitude is also really important in this process. So if you are too eager to accept the job, right, you're kind of making it really easy for them. And that's okay if they present you with an offer up front that meets all of your expectations. But you also want to consider that if you are a little bit too aggressive, you may make the recruiter uncomfortable. It may raise a red flag if you have a hard negotiating term and you're not willing to give that up. You're not willing to discuss any other negotiating point. That may cause the recruiter to pause and wonder if you're the right fit for the position. Another common mistake is discussing your personal salary history. So, you want to focus on your value. You don't want to focus on what you were making before. Unless you are moving from, unless you're moving from one business analyst role into another business analyst role, if you're moving to like positions, I would say, avoid sharing that salary history in all scenarios because you're ideally looking for career advancement. You're looking for the opportunity to improve your current situation. So again, go back to that range. See if they are willing to negotiate within that range. Certainly do not lie about your compensation history, or refuse to share it, like I said, or to become defensive. When employers do reference checks or background checks, it is possible that that salary information will come up. So they may validate your salary with a previous employer. Now, that employer does not have to answer that question, but they may validate your previous salary. And then finally, oops, excuse me, sorry about that. Disclosing your salary conversations too early in the process. So make sure that you have done your market research. Make sure that you are prepared with performance data. If you could also offer previous performance reviews to validate that you feel like you're a strong candidate for their position. So just make sure that you are prepared with all of the background information that you feel you're going to need to go into this negotiation and be successful. Okay. So that concludes the formal part of our presentation. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat just yet, but I'll give you guys a minute to jump right in there.
There is a question in
Yep,
the
just saw that. Where can I
chat.
access the recordings from the previous Zoom meetings? We are in so the first meeting was not recorded. We had some technical difficulties, but the last week's recording will be available shortly. And Stephanie, if you can, I'm going to put my email address in here, and if you could send me an email, I will make sure that you get it. We are right now in the process of figuring out where's the best place to host this information. We do have our platform, Nova Network, which hosts a lot of our previous discussions, such as this. So we don't know exactly where we're going to post all of our recordings yet. We're in the process of working on it. But Stephanie, I think you asked the question. If you send me an email, I'll make sure that you get it when it is available. We're in the process of uploading everything to our YouTube channel. Okay, question from Eric. If I've been a senior business analyst and am now applying for my first paralegal role, am I senior or am I entry level? Really good question, Eric. So I would say um, that is it's kind of a little bit of both. So I would say you are entry level for a paralegal, but you do have previous work experience. So you are not new to a corporate environment. So I would say you're a little bit of both in that scenario. And in that case, I would actually ask the recruiter, how are they considering, what level are they considering the paralegal role that you are applying for, right? And the job description may state that, but I would never hesitate to ask clarifying questions of the recruiters while you are in that process. So in your situation, I would say it's probably a little bit of both. But if this is your first paralegal job, they are likely going to consider you an entry-level paralegal because you don't have any previous law experience. So unless you've got maybe internship experience or you've done some volunteer work, that may help kind of tilt the scale in your favor. But in that situation, I would say you're likely going to be looked at as an entry-level paralegal. Okay. Any other questions? All right, folks, we have some great resources available to you because you are Villanova students. I've shared these in some previous recordings. If you go on our Nova network, you will be able to find what we call under resources. You're going to be able to find tools that will help you, give you some additional guidance. This was just kind of a teaser into offer negotiations. We use a tool called Big Interview that has a whole course. It's probably about 40 minutes long, and it breaks down the actual art of negotiation. It goes into much more detail and how to deal with resistance if you're getting resistance from the recruiter. So I would highly encourage you to go on Nova Network and utilize those tools that are available to you to dive further into this topic and any of the others that we have presented. So with that, I will thank you all for joining, and we appreciate you being here today. We will get this recording on our YouTube channel and get it out. I do have a record of those of you who have registered for this, so that is certainly one way that we will get the recording out, is by sending it to everyone who's registered for today's session. So thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you guys again in the future. Thanks, everyone.